Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the true crime edition of If You Know, You Know, with me, your host, Crystina Friese, a senior anthropology and justice studies dual major at the University of New Hampshire, and my partner, my right-hand gal during this project, my MVP, my BFF, Hannah. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, yes, that's me, Hannah. I am also an anthropology major at the University of New Hampshire. I'm a junior, and we decided to tackle this project for our cold case classes that we decided to take this fall semester, this incredible fall semester. It's a good time, let me tell you. We love school, and we love cold cases, and that's why we're here today, so thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
That's true. Alright, now that you guys know who we are, why don't we get the ball rolling and tell you why we're even here trying to talk to you, attempting to talk to you, hopefully you're listening. So we actually, like I said, we took a cold case class this past semester, and we were given an assignment where we got to choose a cold case, and we stumbled upon a cold case, missing person case of Shirley McBride, also known as Tippy. They called her Tippy. She was 15 years old when she went missing, and she went missing on July 13th, 1984. Little thing about that. It was Friday the 13th. That's crazy.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, exactly. What she said. Like, that's wild. Imagine going missing on Friday the 13th. There's nothing more spooky. All right. But anyways, so the circumstances of her case, she was last seen leaving her sister's apartment on Union Street because she was picking up some moolah, money, and she was walking to her boyfriend's work, and turns out she just vanished into thin air. No one really knew what happened.
Yeah, did not make it there.
This case was not ruled a homicide. It's just a missing persons case, but ever since her disappearance and over time, they kind of feel like foul play was involved. So she's missing under a little bit more heavier circumstances than a regular missing person.
We'll get into that later, though. We'll unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, now that you got a little taste, we'll get back into it in a second, but why don't we tell you about why we even chose this case? We didn't tell you this, but Crystina and I are both from Manchester, New Hampshire, the lovely and one and only Manchester, New Hampshire. And so we already had a personal connection to New Hampshire, so we wanted to work on a New Hampshire cold case. We also were just baffled by the fact that this 15-year-old went missing, and no one really, it was a weird situation. Yeah. We were like, why is this 15-year-old missing and still missing 30 plus years later? Yeah. So what's going on? So we were like, let's get into it. And we wanted to, this case is also a case that's potentially can be resolved, and we wanted to see like the motions of how this can be resolved. Yeah. And so there's also the other situation where we wanted to challenge ourselves with a missing persons case, not just like a cold case homicide case, because for a missing person case, you don't have a body, so that just like is 10 times more challenging of a cold case. So we also wanted to get into that. Yeah. So if you know, you know.
If you know, you know.
That's not going to be the first time you hear that. Thank you for coming.
Not.
No way. All right.
All right. So now that you know a little bit about our case, I just wanted to provide you a little bit of a background on Tippy. For starters, Tippy's nickname stems from a kind of affectionate little nickname that her dad gave her because one of her both her feet?
Yeah.
Okay. Both her feet tip inwards, so her dad gave her this nickname, and it kind of just stuck. But Tippy didn't have the best relationship with her parents. There was kind of some moving around growing up, and, teenagers just they're not really BFFs with their parents all the time. So Tippy, I see a hand there. Hannah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention so her parents ended up moving to Pittsfield. She wasn't really into it. Christina, take over.
Thank you. Yeah, she wasn't a fan of Pittsfield. We're presuming because she lived with her sister on Union Street in Concord. Oh, there's another buzz-in. Hannah, what? Yes.
Yes. Also, I remember reading how she hated Pittsfield so often that she wanted to always go to her sister's house before she actually lived there. She actually just like hitchhiked all the way up to Concord all the time.
Yep, forgot about that.
So
fact.
that was a thing in the 80s to like also keep in mind, like things like that was normal, and that was something she also did. So she hitchhiked up to Concord before she actually lived there with her sister.
Mm-hmm. That's how badly she wanted to live with her sister.
That's true.
And so because she lived with her sister, who is older than her, keep in mind Tippy's 15, sister's in her 20s, she hung out with a lot of her friends, the sister's friends, and her boyfriend, Tippy's boyfriend, was 21 years old at the time, and he was kind of, he drank like a typical 21-year-old, probably smoked. Tippy smoked marijuana. The boyfriend had a motorcycle, and Tippy, there was a quote in an article saying that Tippy was fond of the motorcycle.
Understandable.
Yeah,
I'd be into
pretty cool stuff.
Personally, I'm gonna make it about me in a minute, like just right now. Okay, yeah, I'd be into the motorcycle too, so I can totally dig it. I can understand where Tippy's coming from, especially when you're like an edgy 15-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
And so, Tippy just, lived her life, and she's having a good time. It was kind of known as the party street, the street that she lived on with her sister, and, just living her life, doing some typical adolescent shenanigans of drinking, partying, hanging out with friends, because you have no other cares in the world at the time.
Why not dabble in the dark arts, you know what I mean? Why not?
Exactly. So now that we told you a little bit about Tippy and who she was, a little bit about her overview of her case, I just want to get into how we conducted this research. Researching cold cases is mostly archival research, and we went through online databases like NamUs, which stands for the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, and NCMEC, which is basically NamUs but for kids, the Doe Network, different newspaper article hits, archives. We went through all these and really didn't find too much information. It was very basic, kind of generic. We did get one hit on an article online that we'll talk about in a bit that gave us some leads. But Hannah, why don't you tell us our experience with contacting law enforcement and getting a little more information from maybe case files?
Sure, I'll tell you about that. So here's what it is, everybody. I ended up calling Concord PD because if it's a cold case, you can actually call and ask for the paperwork and the documents.
Sure. And by you mean your average everyday citizen?
Absolutely.
You and I,
anybody.
our mothers?
Me.
Anyone?
Your brother, your mother, anyone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I took it under... It was my responsibility, and I was like, I'm going to call Concord PD and see what's up. I'm going to get all this information. So I called them, and then I quickly learned that this case is actually now open, and we're going to get into how amazing that is later. But just so you all know, you can call the local police department or whatever police department that is working on this cold case and ask for the paperwork and all the documents that go along with the case if it's a cold case and it's not open. Unfortunately, for us and all our research we did, it turned out to be recently opened, so I couldn't actually get all that paperwork. But
and with that, it is important to note that they can redact information. These files will have redacted information, but you still can read a good amount of the notes and different documents that are filled out for a case.
Yeah, and see just how they went about the investigation during the time. So when she went missing in 1984, you can see how the investigators went about this investigation. Right. So why don't we tell you about patch.com, which is where we got probably the most extensive research, or this man who wrote this article dedicated a very years of his life to research this case, research things about Tippy, and truly when we came across this, it made learning about Tippy and the circumstances of her case so much easier to digest. So we really want to give a shout out to our pal Tony who wrote this, and it really just goes into depth about this case.
Yeah, and with that being said, Tony, we actually got a chance to interview him. We talked to him for almost 2 hours, I think. Unfortunately, he's writing, unfortunately on one hand, fortunately on the other, he's writing a book about Tippy's case, and so he can only share so much information because it's in the works of being published kind of thing. But he really helped us clear up some kind of timeline issues that we had, clear up some gaps, answered questions we had. He kind of steered us in the right direction in terms of leads or ideas that we were teasing out. And truly, it was incredible because he actually grew up in Concord at the time that she went missing. He was a little bit older than Tippy was, and he worked in kind of like your local like DVD media store on, like Main Street or whatever in Concord. And the most fascinating thing that he told us was that growing up, he does not remember any media coverage in local newspapers, flyers, anything. And where he worked, he figured there should at least be a flyer on the door or something. Some form of something.
It's a 15-year-old girl that went missing.
Yeah.
That's headline news. Notice. On Friday the 13th. Headline news.
Yeah, honestly. And we both were baffled at that because a young girl goes missing and no one cares. It's incredible. But his story, he kept telling us, different pieces of information he's been able to gather, and he was able to get to know the family later in life, because the article he wrote was published in 2018. So a lot of his research is more recent years he's done this research, and it's really interesting hearing what a journalist's perspective is on this case, because he has room to speculate and kind of go on little side quests that law enforcement can't really investigate if they don't have evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They have to jump through hoops and have all their documents in order, whereas a reporter can just go and interview kind of whoever they think is related, which is pretty interesting.
So he kind of just helped us stay on track with everything and organizing our research, which is very generous of him to do. So thank you, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
Now going on, I did briefly mention after I called Concord PD and then embarrassing myself on the phone, finding out that this case has recently been opened up again. There was a confession from somebody down in Merrimack, New Hampshire, which is only about 30 miles away from Concord.
Yeah.
So it wasn't far away, and the two police departments finally linked up and realized that they had possible evidence from the same case.
Mm-hmm.
So that case ended up being open, and let me tell you a little bit about the confession, because it opened up a case that got no action after about 30 plus years. So, in short, there was this man named Walter Davis. He lived in Merrimack, New Hampshire with his mom and his stepsister, where this really strange situation happened where he was down in his living room or wherever. He was trying to burn this paper bag full of clothes, female clothes. And his mom and his half-sister came down and they were like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" And he stopped what he was doing, didn't burn the clothes, took it out, I'm assuming, and ended up confessing to his family that he really did something truly horrific, disgusting. And he said that he ended up raping a girl and then throwing her in the Merrimack River, and those were her clothes. But so imagine his half-sister was younger than him, and imagine finding out that your half-brother did something so awful and you just don't know what to do. So her half-sister calls her friend and was like, "Hi, I need you to come hang out with me. I have some crazy news that my brother just told me, and I just don't know what to do with it. So her friend ended up coming over. Stacy is her name. Stacy came over, and then the half-sister ended up telling Stacy what Walter just told her, and same thing happened. She was uncomfortable and she didn't know what to do, so she ended up calling her mom and saying, "Hey mom, can you come pick me up? Like, something serious happened and I just need to get out of here." So she called her mom came to pick her up, and then they ended up going to the police department and being like, "Hey, so this happened. I think you should do something about it." So they did. After a couple days, they ended up getting the clothes from Walter Davis and the evidence, collecting it, and then
that's a Merrimack. That's Merrimack PD doing all this, right?
Yes, yeah. It is. And got all the evidence, got the confession from Walter. Keep in mind, Walter at first was like, "Oh no, I found these clothes when I was in Concord in a pond at a park, and I was gonna bring."
They're just like on the road, and I was gonna bring them for my sister.
Yeah,
like, right?
Something really weird like that. But then eventually it ended up just coming ashore that like he raped and killed the girl and threw her in the Merrimack River. So with all that said, that was really what ended up opening this case back up, and that confession really just was the biggest lead that they had for about after 30 years, and it really is what is pushing this case ahead and possibly putting it to a close, as we mentioned in the beginning, how this case is potentially going to be resolved. So currently
Well, the issue was, though, before it gets resolved, was at first this confession happened and they didn't believe him because he was like a local drug user.
Right.
So this confession wasn't really, nothing was linked for years and years and years, even though they had this on record that this man was like, hey, did some stuff.
Not good stuff.
Not good stuff at all. And didn't
follow up on it.
Yeah.
But it's also you need to keep in mind, Tippy's case is being investigated with Concord PD, and this whole other confession happened in Merrimack PD. So those two police departments actually didn't communicate up until now.
Right.
Saying like, oh gosh, we might have some connecting things here. So they finally got that together.
So Merrimack PD had the clothes, Concord PD had the case, and they finally put the two together and are running DNA tests.
Right. So back to what you said, Christina. At first, when Walter ended up doing this whole confession, they really didn't push too much further because Walter was a weird guy. He was a local, people knew who he was. He was a local drug user, and you know what? False confessions happen all the time. So for this like weird drug user guy to come out and be like, hey, I did some really not great things, so what are you gonna do about it? They kind of were like, oh, is this guy crazy, or like what's going on? Obviously they did take the evidence and whatever and put it up in a box and did what they did, but really nothing happened up until now about it. So there's that. That's what happened.
Yep. And I think Tippy's sister gave her DNA to police so that way they can do a DNA test comparing fiber samples, and right now that's in the works.
Right, and that only just happened about 2 years ago, if that. Yeah. So, still getting tested, and we're gonna keep an eye on what the result is.
Definitely gonna keep an eye on it and see. I would love to see the resolution of this case at some point.
Me too.
That would be pretty incredible. But you know, Hannah, we've been talking about a lot of facts, just facts on facts about this case, and facts. And I think we should just kick it and have a conversation, you know, about kind of investigative biases, like cognitive biases in handling information, choosing cases, and just citizen sleuths in general, you know?
Yeah. Okay, Christina. Kicking it with Christina. All right, let's do it. So, cognitive biases.
Yeah, so what I was thinking, and what we talked about during class and everything, with this case in particular, for those of you at home listening who don't know, cognitive biases are kind of just, they're like not superficial, that's the word I'm looking for.
sure don't know.
You don't know that you're thinking this way. So, like, investigators kind of thought Tippy was a runaway, which is why they weren't super, like, she wasn't the most pressing case. Because, you know, the alternative lifestyle, you know,
the 80s,
the older boyfriend, the 80s, everything kind of, they made things shaped in such a way that they could rationalize that, oh, she's probably a runaway.
Right. And you know what? It's really unfortunate that with this case, anyways, that it turned out like that, because, yeah, it's the 80s, and, like, teenagers are getting a little rebellious, and apparently, like, the minute as Christina has been telling me for 2 days straight now, the minute the teenager smells like teen spirit, they kind of just overrule and put her a little bit lower on the spectrum, and, like, the urgency of trying to, like, get this case resolved, like, gets kind of, like, just pushed under the rug a little bit, and you're like, all right,
drops off. The solvability of the case also drops off as more time passes.
And for me, like, it's just surprising with this case, because in my head it just makes most sense, like, just how things are now, how we get Amber Alerts immediately after, like, a child is abducted or goes missing. Like, that's a thing, and that's what's going on now. But I don't know if that went on in the 80s. But anyways, and it's just crazy to me that, like, a 15-year-old girl can go missing, and they automatically are just like, you know, she probably ran away because, you know, she smokes weed, she drinks, she's 15 years old, has a 21-year-old boyfriend. She does the thing, and, you know, she's probably just rebelling. And it's too bad that they kind of looked at her, at Tippy like that, because she's a person and she's a child, and she kind of just got pushed under the rug, which is really unfortunate for this case, and as Christina said, definitely put a block on solving it.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'll give law enforcement investigators that. It is difficult knowing the right and wrong decision, and 9 times out of 10 they make the right decision about cases, but sometimes there are just things that, you know, you can't be perfect all the time.
You know what?
But that's okay. We still appreciate cops for what they do. We'll give them that.
You can't have it all, ladies.
You can't have it all.
You can't have it all. But you know what? We're really out here doing what we can.
That's okay.
but let's...
Oh. Yeah.
Sorry. Let's get into it. Let's talk about, citizen sleuths.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You know, the citizen sleuths, your average, everyday person doing research on cold cases.
Christina. Or me.
True, us both. I thought you were going to drop some real serious, like, spill some hot
you thought it was addressing you? You thought, no, it's not about you right now.
Oh, cool. Okay, so back to the citizen sleuths. You know, the average everyday person fills in the gap of what law enforcement might not be able to do. Because, you know, New Hampshire, luckily, has a cold case unit. Luckily. Not every state, or even probably country in this world, has a cold case unit in their investigative services.
Right. And let me tell you, like, I don't know any real statistics about this, but I would probably say that, like, 50% or more of, cases that are, cold cases especially, that get solved are because of citizen sleuths, you know? Like, just them dedicating and fixating on one specific case, when in cold case units, like in law enforcement and whatnot, they've got piles of cases. They are probably working on 10 cases at a time. Probably. And for a citizen sleuth to just take one case and just fixate on it and do what they can, like, they really do. Honestly, sometimes they're the one that solves it. They're sometimes they're the ones that give the biggest leads, like Susie did. She gave the biggest lead for this case to even get reopened. And that's what a citizen...
Stacy?
Susie.
Who's Susie?
Isn't that her name?
Stacy? The friend?
Yeah.
Girl, Stacy. You losing it.
That's true. All right. Sorry,
but that's
everybody.
You know, exactly. That's the point, is that it's hard for anyone to keep all the facts straight.
Right. And I think a perfect example of this too, the Bear Brook case with all these, that's also another New Hampshire case, and how there's 4 unidentified homicide victims.
Yeah. AKA the Allenstown murderers, or the Allenstown 4.
Right. And a librarian, not anyone in law enforcement, just a librarian, your average woman
who was from Connecticut, I believe.
Right, she was.
Not even New Hampshire.
And she found out who 3 out of the 4 victims were, which is truly incredible. Like, really, like, can you imagine? That's huge. That is huge. So, like, what I'm trying to say here is, citizen sleuths, like, please please grind it out and do that for us, because, like, we need
grind it out and do your research if you're interested. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Right. It's worth it in the long run. But with that said, also, with citizen sleuths, it's important to take everything, once you start going, because there's a lot of information on the internet, because I feel like that's just the time and that's the first place you're going to look. And you're going to come across a lot of rabbit holes that go into really weird places and get into really weird theories. Mm-hmm. And with that, you need to take it with a grain of salt. Like, sometimes people try to make these weird connections that don't make sense. Like, with Tippy's case, when I was doing some research, I remember coming across this theory where they thought it was a serial killer truck driver that drove through Concord. And they even went as far as connecting another cold case victim in Concord, but you feel like
there was
a serial killer?
Nothing the same about these two people.
No, absolutely not.
She was like, the other person was like a mom, 30-something years old.
Yes.
Like,
someone broke into her apartment and murdered her. Where Tippy, she's just someone who vanished. Like, how can you even make a connection there? In my head, it doesn't make sense. The only thing that connects it is they're both in Concord, and sure, there's a highway. So,
and
some truck drivers.
Female bodies.
Right. So, like, in my head, I'm like, I don't even see connections. So, with, like, situations like that, you need to take it with a grain of salt. There's only so much you can really get from going down those rabbit holes.
What's really helpful with researching cold cases, rather, is just keeping a file or document either on, like, Google Drive or even just, like, your laptop. Just keeping a place where you can put all your Reddit links or all your website hits or all your newspaper article clippings, links to those, or a little summary of the case, what happened, so that we can refresh your memory when you go do some research.
Right.
Or if you have some thoughts of different things to piece together, teasing out your ideas because you see a pattern amongst these certain websites, but you don't see that pattern in other websites, or maybe some information is more specific on one database but not on the others, and you can make these connections by organizing your information in just a big compiled document that has everything that you can find on your case.
And keep in mind that don't forget that you do have law enforcement on your side, and if it's a cold case you're working on and it is a cold case, it's not reopened or anything, it's under an investigation, make sure you call the police department that's working on it, because they're going to have all the paperwork of how the investigation was, how they even went about the investigation. And honestly, that could even be critical to your personal investigation.
Yep, citizens can. That's definitely one thing I found out that I never knew before, is that citizens can request case document information about cold cases.
And sometimes they give you hundreds of pages, but you know what? Maybe those hundreds of pages will tell you something. And a fresh set of eyes on that case might be what that case needs.
Definitely. And I think it's just so important that people do this, because otherwise all these people, all their stories, their lives are just gone. You know? And that's what's so important about us doing this research on Tippy's case. Even though we're not, we didn't find the missing link and solve her case and, found where her body is after all these years and figured out what happened, we're still talking about her. We know a bit about her life. Whatever happened to her, at least her life wasn't,
forgotten about. And you know what? Like, Christina and I know, our classmates know, my roommates know, I talk about this stuff all the time. This is just a personal interest of mine. I am even trying to further my education in it, and you can too. But honestly, if you don't want to further your education into something like that, like we said, it can just be a hobby, and that's what a lot of times citizen sleuths are. It's just a hobby somebody may have.
Just in your spare time. That's really what it is, what it boils down to. It's just extra set of eyes looking at a case, trying to figure out what happened.
Well, I feel like that covers our bases
I
of
think
what we
so.
wanted to tell everybody.
I think just on a final note, just about victim advocacy is really what that's all about. You know, telling the stories for those who don't have a voice to tell their own.
You're not wrong, Christina.
Facts on facts. I told
true.
you. That's if you know, you know.
If you know, you know. True Crime Edition. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. And with that, that's a wrap.
Smell you later.